Welcome. Today we're setting out on a truly remarkable exploration of a legend, a musical force so vast that its history really is the history of modern popular culture.
It is. We are, of course, talking about the Beatles.
And the subject is just overwhelming, isn't it?
It is. When you look at the sheer volume of material we have, decades of research, articles, interviews, it's clear this isn't just a band's story.
No, it's a cultural touchstone. So our mission today is really to synthesize all of that, to try and understand how four young men from Liverpool became, well, the most influential musical force the world has ever known.
And you have to start with the sheer scale of their success. It's just unmatched.
Completely. Before we get into the story, we have to ground the conversation in those numbers.
Exactly. The core lineup, everyone knows it. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr.
The Fab Four.
And commercially, they just stand alone. They are the best-selling music act of all time. The estimated global sales are somewhere around 600 million units.
600 million. It's a number that's almost impossible to really comprehend.
It is, but if you drill down into the US and UK markets, it becomes a bit clearer.
You see the dominance.
Yeah, they hold two records that will almost certainly never be broken. In the US, they have the most #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, 20 of them.
20. And in the UK?
In the UK, it's albums. They have the most #1 albums on the UK albums chart with 15.
And the sources all stress this isn't just about sales.
No, not at all. This is a story about a revolution. They were, integral to the 1960s counterculture. They took popular music, which was seen as sort of light entertainment, and they elevated it.
To an art form.
To a genuine art form. And they pioneered everything, from their early skiffle and rock and roll, all the way through to psychedelia and even hard rock.
It really is the ultimate story. And to appreciate how sophisticated they became, we have to start right at the beginning.
The very beginning.
Let's go back to their formation, that period from 1956 to 63, the messy start in Liverpool and that grueling time in Hamburg.
It all starts with John Lennon. He was 16, and in November 1956, he started a skiffle group called the Quarrymen.
And skiffle, for anyone who doesn't know, was a very specific British thing, wasn't it?
It was. It was sort of a mix of jazz, blues, folk. But the key thing is that it was often played on improvised instruments.
Like washboards and things like that.
Exactly. Washboard, a tea chest for a bass. It was a real DIY, grassroots kind of music, perfect for ambitious working-class kids.
And the partnership that would change the world formed very quickly after that.
In July 1957, a 15-year-old Paul McCartney met Lennon and joined the group, and his talent was obvious from day one.
And he brought in George Harrison.
He did. He really pushed for his school friend, George. Lennon, who was 18 by then, thought George was just too young. He was only 15.
I love the story of how Harrison finally won him over.
It's a great little anecdote. Harrison just kept trying, and he finally sealed the deal by playing the lead guitar part from the instrumental Raunchy for Lennon.
Where was this?
On the upper deck of a Liverpool bus. That was his audition. And it worked. He was officially joining in February 1958.
An audition on a bus. It just perfectly sums up where they came from.
It does. And during this early, unstable time, they went through a whole string of names.
Right. The Quarrymen name didn't last forever.
No. Sometimes they were Johnny and the Moondogs. For a short time, they were even the Rainbows.
The Rainbows. Where did that come from?
McCartney said it was because they couldn't afford matching outfits, so they all just wore different colored shirts.
Ah, okay.
The real shift came in January 1960 when Lennon's friend from art school, Stuart Sutcliffe, joined on bass.
And Sutcliffe gave them the name.
He's the one. He suggested Beatles as a kind of tribute to Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
An insect name, but with a pun on the beat movement.
Precisely. It went through a few versions, the Silver Beatles, but they finally settled on the Beatles in August 1960.
And that was right before things got very serious very quickly.
It was. That's when they went to Germany.
The Hamburg Crucible.
That's what the sources call it, and it's the perfect term. Their unofficial manager, Alan Williams, got them these residencies starting in August 1960. And they were playing in the roughest clubs in the city's red light district.
And the schedule was just brutal.
Unbelievable. 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week.
How did they even do that? Physically?
Well, they had help. The sources confirmed they were using Preludum, which is an amphetamine, to stay awake and just keep their energy up for these marathon shows.
So it was a pretty chaotic environment.
Incredibly chaotic. And it led to trouble with the German authorities pretty quickly.
This is where the early drama kicks in.
It is. George Harrison was only 17, and he'd lied about his age. When the authorities found out, he was deported in November 1960.
And then McCartney and their original drummer, Pete Best, got into even more serious trouble.
A week later, yeah, they were arrested and deported for arson.
Arson. They actually set a fire.
They did, though it's maybe not as dramatic as it sounds. The sources say they set fire to a condom in a concrete corridor.
Why?
Apparently as a kind of parting gesture because they were being kicked out of their grim living quarters. But, it was still arson, and it got them thrown out of the country.
It just shows the kind of reckless energy they had back then. But Hamburg also gave them their look, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Stuart Sutcliffe's German fiancée, Astrid Kircher, was an artist. She cut his hair in what was called the Exa style, the existentialist look, that mop top. The others eventually copied it.
And when Sutcliffe left the band, McCartney took over on bass.
Right. Sutcliffe decided to stay in Hamburg to focus on his art in 1961, so Paul switched to bass, and that really locked in the classic lineup. They also got their first recording contract there with Polydor, backing a singer named Tony Sheridan.
So they came back to Liverpool as seasoned veterans, but they still needed that professional polish.
And that's where Brian Epstein comes in. He owned a local record store, saw them at the Cavern Club in November '61, and immediately spotted their, quote, star quality.
He became their manager and cleaned up their act.
Completely. He made them stop swearing and smoking on stage, wear suits, and do a coordinated bow after each song. It was all about making them presentable for a major record label.
And that first attempt to get a record deal resulted in maybe the most famous rejection in music history.
The Decca Records audition. New Year's Day in 1962, they were rejected, and the line from the executive was, "Guitar groups are on the way out, Mr. Epstein."
It's just an incredible misjudgment.
One of the biggest. But Epstein kept at it and eventually got a meeting with George Martin at EMI's Parlophone label. Martin saw the potential and signed them.
And Martin, the fifth Beatle, made his mark immediately by changing the lineup.
Right away. At their first session in June '62, he complained about Pete Best's drumming. The band was already having issues with him, so this was the final push they needed.
And in came Ringo Starr.
In mid-August, they replaced Best with Ringo, who had been drumming for another popular Liverpool band, and that was it. The final permanent lineup was set.
But even Ringo's spot wasn't totally secure at first, was it?
That's a great detail. For their first single, Love Me Do, Martin still wasn't convinced, so he hired a session drummer, Andy White, for a later recording.
So who's actually playing on the record?
It's confusing. The first UK single has Ringo on it, but he's playing tambourine, not drums. Andy White is on drums. But then later pressings used a version with Ringo on drums. Regardless, the song got to number 17, and it put them on the map.
And it was their second single, where George Martin's genius really showed.
Yeah, he suggested they speed up the tempo on Please Please Me, and after they recorded it, he came over the intercom and said, "You've just made your first #1.
And he was right.
He was, and from that moment, the momentum was just unstoppable. They went from local heroes to national celebrities, which takes us right into the era of Beatlemania.
This is the period of just total global domination, 63 to 66.
And it started with incredible efficiency. Their first album, Please Please Me, was recorded in a single day.
One day.
One single session on February 11th, 1963. 10 songs. Martin just wanted to capture their live energy from the Cavern Club, and by April, the title track was at the top of every chart in Britain.
And once that first one hit, the floodgates just opened.
The chart run they had was, almost ridiculous. Their next single, From Me to You, kicked off a string of 17 British #1 singles.
17.
But the real explosion was She Loves You in August '63. It sold 750,000 copies in less than 4 weeks. It became their first million seller in the UK.
And that explosion in popularity needed a name.
It did, and the press gave it one. Beatlemania. The term was coined after they appeared on Sunday night at the London Palladium, which was watched by 15 million people. The papers used it to describe the, quote, riotous enthusiasm of the screaming fans.
It's more than just popularity at that point. It's a social phenomenon.
And the critics started to take them seriously, too. This is crucial. William Mann of the Times wrote a piece calling Lennon and McCartney the outstanding English composers of 1963.
That gave them a kind of intellectual respectability that pop music just didn't have back then.
Exactly. But conquering the UK was one thing. The real game changer was America.
Which was a tough market to crack for British bands.
Very tough. In fact, Capitol Records, EMI's American label, refused to release their early stuff. They just didn't think it would sell.
So what was the catalyst? What finally broke them in the U.S.?
It was a DJ in Washington, D.C. named Carol James. He got a copy of I Want to Hold Your Hand and just started playing it. The listener demand was so huge and so immediate that Capitol was forced to rush release the single.
And it took off?
It sold 1 million copies by the middle of January '64. The British invasion had begun.
And the absolute peak of that invasion was their first live TV appearance.
The Ed Sullivan Show. February 9th, 1964. The numbers are just staggering. 73 million people watched.
Which is what, a third of the entire U.S. population?
34%, yeah. At the time, it was the largest television audience ever recorded in America.
You have to think about the timing of that, too. The cultural context.
Well, that's the key. The sources all agree on this. America was still in mourning after JFK's assassination just a few months earlier. There was this national gloom.
And then these four guys show up.
Exactly. 4 witty, energetic, joyful young men. They just reignited a sense of excitement and possibility. They were an antidote to the sadness.
And the commercial domination that followed was just... It's hard to even describe.
It was a monopoly. In the first week of April 1964, the Beatles held the top 5 spots on the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously.
The entire top 5.
And 12 spots in the Hot 100 overall. It was unprecedented, and it just blew the doors open for every other British band.
At the same time, they were conquering cinema with A Hard Day's Night.
A huge hit. And musically, that album was a big step forward. It's where you first hear George Harrison using his Rickenbacker 12-string guitar, which gave them that iconic ringing sound.
But beyond the music and the fun, they also used this incredible platform to take a stand on a really serious issue in America.
Civil rights. And this is a really important part of their story. During their '64 U.S. tour, they were booked to play the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, Florida, which was a segregated venue.
And they refused to play.
They absolutely refused. Lennon's quote is powerful. He said, "We never played to segregated audiences, and we aren't going to start now." The city officials had no choice but to back down and integrate the show.
And they made that a standard clause in their contracts after that.
They did. For all their future U.S. tours, the contracts explicitly stated that the audiences had to be integrated. They used their power to force change.
So their artistic maturity is accelerating just as fast as their fame.
It is. By the time you get to Rubber Soul in 1965, it's a whole new level. Critics at the time called it a huge leap forward.
And the sources are pretty clear about what influenced that leap.
Oh, yeah. It was their now habitual use of marijuana. Lennon himself called it the pot album. The lyrics became more introspective, more philosophical.
And musically, it's where George Harrison introduces an instrument that changes the sound of pop music forever.
The sitar. On Norwegian wood, this bird has flown. It was the first time an Indian instrument had been used like that on a Western rock record. It was a landmark moment.
And this is also when their cultural power starts to clash with the British establishment.
Right. In 1965, the Queen awarded all 4 of them the MBE member of the Order of the British Empire.
And this caused a huge uproar.
A huge one. Conservative recipients, mostly old military officers, started sending their medals back in protest. They felt it cheapened the award. It just showed the massive cultural shift that was happening. Youth culture was taking over.
Which sets the stage perfectly for their final, most experimental, and also most difficult phase, the studio era, from 66 to 70.
And that period starts with a series of major controversies.
It really gets turbulent here.
First, in June '66, you have the Butcher cover for the American album Yesterday and Today. It's that infamous picture of them covered in raw meat and decapitated dolls.
And the public reaction was not good.
It was an uproar. Capitol had to recall hundreds of thousands of copies and paste a new, boring cover over the old one.
Then things got physically dangerous for them on tour.
The trip to the Philippines in July '66, they unintentionally snubbed the First Lady, Imelda Marcos, and the regime basically turned the public against them. There were riots. They were lucky to get out of the country alive.
But the biggest controversy, the one that really hurt them in America, came from John Lennon himself.
The more popular than Jesus comment. He said it to a British newspaper, and in the UK, nobody really cared. But when it was reprinted in the US, it caused a firestorm.
Especially in the South.
Exactly. There were protests, radio stations banned their music, people held public bonfires to burn their records. It was intense. Lennon had to apologize, but the damage was done.
And all of this, the controversies, the danger, the fact that they couldn't even hear themselves play over the screaming fans, it all led to one big decision.
They had to stop touring. Their final concert was at Candlestick Park in San Francisco on August 29th, 1966. They were done with live shows.
And that decision freed them up to create Revolver, which is just this massive artistic leap.
The quantum leap. The songwriting is so sophisticated. You have Eleanor Rigby with a string octet, and then you have Lennon's tracks, which are just pure studio experimentation.
Like Tomorrow Never Knows. How did they even create that sound in 1966?
With pure ingenuity. They created these elaborate tape loops. For instance, they'd record McCartney laughing, and then they'd speed up the tape or play it backwards to create this bizarre, otherworldly sound. They were literally cutting up bits of tape and splicing them together.
So they were using the studio itself as an instrument.
Precisely. And once they were off the road for good, they poured all of that energy into their next project.
Screed Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
An album that took over 700 hours to record. They were pushing the 4-track recording technology to its absolute limit, placing microphones inside the bells of horns, taping them to violins. Just constant innovation.
And it was immediately recognized as a masterpiece.
Instantly. It was the first rock album to win the Grammy for Album of the Year. And it was the first to print the full lyrics on the back cover, which encouraged people to analyze it like, a piece of literature.
But right at this creative peak, tragedy strikes.
In August 1967, their manager, Brian Epstein, died of an accidental overdose, and he was their anchor. He was the one who held everything together.
And Lennon's reaction says it all.
He said, "We collapsed. I knew that we were in trouble then. I thought we fucking had it now." And without Epstein, they started to drift.
And the first sign of that was their TV film, Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, their first real critical failure. The papers in Britain just savaged it. They called it blatant rubbish. They had lost their quality control.
And the internal fractures started to get wider.
The trip to India in '68 to study with the Maharishis started well, but it ended in acrimony and disillusionment. And then they started their own company, Apple Corps.
Which was meant to be this kind of utopian creative hub.
A sort of Western communism, as McCartney called it. But in reality, it was just chaotic, and it drained them financially.
All of this tension finally boils over during the sessions for the next album.
The Beatles, which everyone just calls the White Album.
And the relations in the studio were just toxic.
Completely divisive. Ringo actually quit the band for 2 weeks. McCartney had to play drums on a couple of tracks. Lennon was openly mocking Paul's songs, calling them granny music shit.
And Lennon started bringing Yoko Ono to the sessions, which broke their long-standing rule.
Which just added to the tension. The album itself is brilliant, but it's the sound of a band falling apart. As Lennon said himself, it wasn't the Beatles. It was John in the band, Paul in the band, George in the band.
And somehow it got even worse with the next project, which was supposed to be a Back to Basics album.
The Let It Be sessions, or Get Back, as it was originally called. It was just a miserable experience for everyone. George Harrison walked out for 5 days.
And he only came back on a couple of conditions.
Yeah, one was that they had to abandon any talk of playing live again. The other was that he could bring in an outside musician to ease the tension.
Keyboardist Billy Preston.
Exactly. And his presence calmed things down so much that he was given a co-credit on the Get Back single, the only musician to ever get that on a Beatles single.
But those sessions did produce one final, iconic live moment.
The rooftop concert. Unannounced, on top of their office building in London. A final, brilliant, spontaneous performance before the police shut them down.
It's just amazing that after all of that, they managed to pull it together one last time for Abbey Road.
Even George Martin was surprised. He only agreed to produce it if they promised to act professionally again. And for the most part, they did.
And you can hear that on the album. Side 2 is that incredible, seamless medley.
That was largely McCartney's idea. The recording of the song, I Want You, She's So Heavy, on August 20th, 1969. That was the last time all 4 of them were ever in a studio together.
And Lennon had actually quit the band by then. He just hadn't announced it.
That's right. He told the others in September, but they agreed to keep it quiet. Abbey Road came out and was a massive success. A fitting swan song.
But it wasn't the last album to be released.
No, that was Let It Be. The tapes from those miserable sessions were given to producer Phil Spector.
And he added his famous wall of sound production to it.
He did. Lots of strings, choirs, especially on the long and winding road.
Which Paul McCartney absolutely hated.
He was enraged. He saw as vandalism of his song. And that was the final straw. On April 10th, 1970, he publicly announced he was leaving the Beatles. The partnership was officially dissolved at the end of that year.
Which brings us to the post-breakup era. A story of solo success, deep tragedy, and eventually technological revival.
All four had immediate solo success, but the hope for a real reunion never happened. The closest they came was on Ringo's 1973 solo album, where all four contributed, but on separate tracks.
And then, the decade ended with an event that just shocked the entire world.
John Lennon's murder. In December 1980, he was shot and killed outside his apartment in New York.
It's a moment of just profound sadness. The grief was global.
It was. A voice that had defined a generation was just silenced. And the surviving members paid tribute in their own music, George Harrison with All Those Years Ago and McCartney with Here Today.
The story then goes quiet for a while until the 90s when something unexpected happened.
The Anthology Project, a huge documentary series and 3 albums of outtakes.
And for this, the 3 surviving Beatles actually collaborated on new music.
They did. They took old, unfinished demo tapes of John Lennon's, and with producer Jeff Lynne, they added new parts to create 2 new Beatles songs.
Free as a Bird and Real Love.
Right. They tried a third one now and then, but they had to abandon it. The quality of Lennon's vocal on the demo was just too poor to isolate.
And then, sadly, another loss followed in the 2000s.
George Harrison died of lung cancer in November 2001, another profound loss.
So the story of the Beatles as a living, breathing entity seems over, but their legacy becomes intertwined with new technology.
Constantly. You have the Love album in 2006, where George Martin and his son remixed and mashed up their recordings, then the big digital remastering project in 2009.
But the real cutting-edge tech comes from Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary.
Right. His team developed a bespoke AI demixing technology. It can take a single mono track and perfectly separate the individual voices and instruments. It's revolutionary.
And that technology allowed them to finally finish that song they abandoned in the 90s.
Exactly. Using that AI, they were finally able to isolate John's vocal on Now and Then. And in 2023, they released it as the final Beatles record.
And it was a huge hit.
A massive hit. It became their first UK #1 since 1969, and it won a Grammy.
The first AI-assisted track to ever win a Grammy. A perfect, modern bookend to their story of innovation.
It really is.
So let's step back and look at the artistry itself. At the core, it was this friction between Lennon and McCartney.
That creative tension was essential. McCartney is described as the natural melodist. His writing was vertical, built on harmonies and big, singable melodies.
Whereas Lennon's style was more horizontal.
Exactly. More ironic, more minimalist. His melodies often followed the cadence of speech. You had the light and the dark, the optimist and the cynic. That's what made the partnership so powerful.
But it's so important not to overlook the other two.
Absolutely not. George Harrison's guitar playing provided so much of the character and texture. And Ringo Starr, he's rightly called the father of modern pop rock drumming. His style was so unique and so perfect for their songs.
And all that was guided and shaped by George Martin.
The 5th Beatle. He was their musical translator. He took their abstract ideas, Lennon wanting to sound like the Dalai Lama singing from a mountaintop, and he figured out how to make them a reality in the studio. He introduced them to a whole world of classical sounds.
So at the end of the day, what is their ultimate legacy?
Well, they sparked the British invasion. They essentially invented the album as an art form, moving it from just a collection of singles to a cohesive statement. And they were pioneers in the studio, using it as a creative tool in ways no one had before.
And beyond the music, they became these symbols of sociocultural change.
They did. They were catalysts for changes in fashion, in youth culture, in activism. They became an embodiment of the 1960s.
As we wrap up, there's one final, fascinating, and kind of troubling part of their story to consider: the ownership of their own songs.
It's an incredibly complex issue. From the very beginning, Lennon and McCartney were signed to a publishing company, Northern Songs, where they were minority shareholders.
So they didn't even have a controlling interest in their own work.
Not at all. The control rested with businessmen. And the real betrayal came in 1969, when those businessmen sold their controlling shares to a media company called ATV.
And they did it without even telling the band.
Completely behind their backs. Suddenly, a corporation owned the publishing rights to almost the entire Lennon-McCartney songbook.
And those rights then got bought and sold like any other asset.
Exactly. They were eventually bought by Michael Jackson in 1985 for a huge sum, and then later they were absorbed by Sony, creating Sony ATV.
So for decades, the world's greatest songwriters didn't own the publishing to their own creations.
That's right. And it's only because of a clause in U.S. copyright law that Paul McCartney was able, in 2017, to begin the legal process of reclaiming his share of the rights.
After 56 years.
After 56 years. And it just raises this really profound question about the disparity between the generational cultural value of art, which is immeasurable, and the cold corporate mechanisms that control its legacy.
A sobering thought to end on, that even the Beatles had to fight that battle.
It's a stark reminder.
Thank you for joining us for this look at the monumental story of the Beatles.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening.